Hi everyone, my name is Ashka and welcome back to my channel. So if you're new here, I produce video essays surrounding Bollywood and the Indian diaspora, and sometimes I will dive into American pop culture as well. So if any of that interests you, please subscribe to the channel and give this video a thumbs up. So if you are not new here, you may have noticed I'm in a different setup. In my last video, I mentioned that I was moving, and I'm very happy with where I'm at now. And I also have a new microphone, so hopefully we won't get any audio peaks from now on. This was a Christmas gift, so I'm very excited to record a video with it. So for today's video, I initially wanted to make a video about like Fair and Lovely and skin lightening creams and colorism in Bollywood. And as I was doing research for this video, I came across a lot of historical and cultural context that really interested me. And so I dove deeper into it and found a lot of topics to discuss. And so I decided to make this a two-part series. So today in part one, we're going to be talking about the historical and cultural context surrounding colorism in India. And then in part two, we'll talk specifically about Bollywood, and maybe we can watch some Fair and Lovely commercials and dissect them a little bit. But for today's video, we're going to be talking about the caste system, colorism, the patriarchy, religion. So we're really going to be covering a wide range of topics today. So let's get right into it. Before we jump in though, I just want to give a quick disclaimer. Number one, I am a light-skinned Indian, which means I benefit from the privilege of being light-skinned. You know, I've been praised for having light skin, which I find weird. And I've always found, commenting on other people's skin tones and giving suggestions on how to lighten their skin, I always found that so strange because skin color is not really something that you can control. But I just wanted to say that, first of all. And second of all, I am an ABCD, American born, confused desi. I was not born in India and I did not grow up in India. And so there might be some things that I'm missing, some context or some pieces that I'm maybe missing. And so I would love to hear in the comments your own lived experience if you want to share. And if there's anything that you would like to add on to what I'm talking about, I would love to learn and read what you guys have to say. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Let's start by defining colorism. Colorism is the prejudice or discrimination against individuals with a dark skin tone, typically among people of the same ethnic or racial group. So the second part of that definition will come into play very quickly in this video. And I did a lot of research for this video, so there's a lot of different articles and authors that I'll be quoting. One of them is Dustin Jung, who wrote an article titled Colorism in Indian Society, A Complex History. So to quote Dustin Jung, unlike racism, which implies all phenotypic characteristics, colorism concentrates on skin tone. Thereby, colorism results in a consistent rivalry for resources between the racial divisions. People who are lighter in skin tone benefit from resources that a white population has accorded to them. So when we talk about colorism, obviously it wasn't created in a vacuum. Colorism is a social construct in the same way that gender is a social construct, that race is a social construct. It's all kind of made up, right? But we have to remember that we live in a society. Newsflash, we do live in a society. And the society that we live in is a hegemonic society. So hegemony essentially is one group dominating over another. And when you have one group dominating over another, the group that is dominant becomes the norm. And so a dichotomy is formed between the norm and the other, and there's kind of no in between. So you have, for example, you're either a man or you're not a man. You're either white or you're not white. You're either light-skinned or you're not light-skinned. Basically, this creates a sense of power among the people who are dominant. And the people that are in power reinforce these ideologies in this case for colorism, that whiteness is the norm and whiteness is the epitome of beauty, intelligence, and everything else. So in this case, when whiteness becomes the default, when it becomes the norm, it can be very easy to then suppress the other group of people and to other them and to make them feel that they do not belong in this category because it's such a strong dichotomy. So the question now is, how did we get here? Because India is a very huge country and the population of India is extremely diverse. I'll put some photos up on the screen so you can really see like all of these people are from India, but India is so vast that there are so many geographical locations. There are so many different phenotypes in the way that people appear. So how does colorism happen in a country that has such diverse skin tones and phenotypes? So my thesis for this half of the video is that the idea that whiteness is the norm was a result of the pre-existing caste system in India and was heavily reinforced by colonization. So we're going to really get into it here. We're going to be talking about the caste system and colonization. We have to remember that it wasn't always like this. To quote Neha Mishra in her article, India and Colorism, The Finer Nuances, there was historically an acceptance of diversity in physical attributes, and beauty was not accorded on the basis of skin color. So not only do we have a diverse array of skin tones in India, we also have diversity amongst the various castes. So the caste system in India is essentially a hierarchy, which it wasn't always a hierarchy, but it is considered like a hierarchy of different classes of people, essentially, that are sorted into different castes. So the origin of this was not intended to be a hierarchy. So we're going to see several themes come up over and over again in this video, one of which is utilizing texts or theories, scientific theories, to justify certain ideologies of colorism and whiteness, right? So the caste system was not intended to be a hierarchy, but in the Rig Veda, which is one of the religious texts of Hinduism, we have this passage that essentially people use to justify the hierarchy of a caste system. So I'm going to be reading directly. This quote is also from Neha Mishra's article. The much-cited Purush Sukta in the Rig Veda explains how the four orders in society originated from the self-sacrifice of Purusha, the primeval being who destroyed himself so that an appropriate social order could emerge. Brahmin, born from the head, Kshatriya from the arms, Vaishya from the thighs, and Sudras from the feet. Division of labor was accordingly done in society. The Purush Sukta is often misinterpreted to dictate a hierarchy. However, it was actually a metaphorical classification. All four classes existing in the society emerge from the same body and have different but equally important functions in society. So from this passage, we can see that the caste system was intended to be more of a metaphor, but clearly that's not how it's practiced. So let's dive a little bit deeper into the caste system and how this ties into colorism. So let's talk about the caste system as a hierarchy. To quote Neha Mishra again, Brahmins were put at the top of the ladder. Its members were intellectuals who worked as scholars, teachers, and priests. Kshatriyas performed military tasks, Vaisyas were farmers and merchants. Lastly, Sudras were placed on the lowest rank and subservient to the other castes. As you can see, the people in the lower castes hold the jobs with the most amount of physical labor. Let's also remember that physical labor is mostly done outdoors, which of course staying in the sun for many hours of the day can make your skin darker, right? So keep that in mind. But also, I find it very interesting. This is a little bit of a tangent, but I do find it interesting that the jobs that require the most strenuous physical labor are the jobs that are the least valued in our society all around the world, right? Stuff like agriculture, construction jobs, cleaning jobs, like these are things that requires so much labor, and without these jobs, our society literally would not function. Like the reason why you have fresh fruit and vegetables to eat every single day is because of the agricultural labor that exists. The reason you're in a space, a house, an apartment is because of the construction workers that built literally the roof over your head. And I just find it so fascinating that these are the jobs that are the least valued in our society. And that's exactly what they're saying here about the caste system. But without these people, we would not be able to live the lives that we live today. They are just as important, but the work is labeled as grunt work and the work is labeled as something that is beneath us. But without them, we literally wouldn't function in the way that we do as a society. So I just wanted to make that note. But how does this relate to colorism? Because again, we have a diverse range of people in India within different castes, right? Like within Brahmins, for example, we have darker skin and lighter skin individuals. So out of all these castes that are presented here, who has the most motivation to continue the hierarchy? The people at the top, right? So the Brahmins in this case. So to quote Dustin Jung, complexion materialized as caste affiliation became more stringent and inheritable. Henceforth, the objective of caste was to preserve the purity of race and blood. We have this lack of social mobility that was enforced by the Brahmins. This idea that you can't really move up and whatever caste you were born into is the one that you're going to stick with for the rest of your life. This also leads to people marrying within their caste and having children who preserve the pure blood, which I hate that, but that is an ideology here, this idea of purity and preservation of light skin, which is going to come up again later in this video. This idea was reinforced by those at the top. And that's how caste became more than just about the role that you play in society. It also became your skin tone. And the Brahmins, who spend most of their time indoors, are going to be lighter skin. And this is kind of where it began. So it's important to note with, these concepts, these are very broad concepts, as you can probably tell. And it's very hard to pinpoint, like, this is where it started, right? Because obviously with globalization and everything, you can't really pinpoint, like, oh, colorism began in whatever year, I know this is very broad right now. We are going to get more specific. This is how caste and colorism are linked to one another. So another article I read for this video is by Rebecca Peters, and it's called Colorism, Casteism, and Gentrification in Bollywood. So I'm going to quote from this article. She says, in South Asia, colorism has a link to casteism. This association of color with caste has two equally destructive consequences. One, it reinforces casteist ideas of hierarchy among groups, whereby lower castes are less desirable. And two, this association with a religious rhetoric of status and purity excuses those in power from addressing any resulting social problems. So remember when I defined colorism and I was talking about how colorism essentially separates people who are in the same group. For example, it separates Indians into light-skinned Indians and dark-skinned Indians, when in reality, we're all Indians, right? We all have this common thread, but it creates divisiveness within the subgroup, if you will. And this causes culture wars. This causes class wars. It causes religious conflict. This is all foreshadowing for what we're going to talk about next, which is colonization. When you have a group of people who are divided amongst themselves, it's very, very easy to reinforce your power over them. And it's also a very good tool that is used to distract people from what's actually going on. And it's a really tactful way to kind of sneak in and do what you need to do. Sounds familiar, right? It sounds very familiar to what's happening in American politics right now. For a long time, liberals and conservatives have been pitted against one another without understanding that actually we have a lot more in common than we think we do. And actually we have little to nothing in common with those at the top. And we should really be, working together to create like the country that we want to thrive in. But because we're pitted against one another, it's very hard to unite people. And in the same way, we're going to see the impact of that with colonization. So enough of the prelude. Let's get into colonization and colorism. So colonization is nothing new, right? Obviously, it's been going on for centuries, and a vast majority of countries around the world have been colonized at some point, mostly by Europeans, right? So during the Age of Enlightenment, Europeans would use colorism to justify slavery. So to quote Rebecca Peters, by positing that those who lived in different climates and held different physical features were less human, scholars could create a racialized science that ignored their contradictory positions. And also with Darwin's theory of evolution, white men could justify that they're just more evolved than those with darker skin, and therefore they should be in power. And I find this notion interesting because I think it speaks to the level of internalized colorism that a lot of us have, in the same way that we have internalized misogyny or internalized racism. We do have internalized colorism in the sense that, you know, white people are more classy and they're more dignified, and, you know, other cultures of color are less intelligent and not as hygienic, and all these things, all these stereotypes that we've internalized is really reflected here. And this goes back centuries, this ideology that's really been ingrained in us. We're going to talk more about that shortly, but I just found that interesting that the way that they kind of position themselves is very similar to how, unfortunately, we think today, even if it is subconsciously. So because of increased colonization, whiteness became the norm, and it became the ideal for intelligence, for beauty, for status. And this is, of course, not just in India. This is all around the world, pretty much. So when I was researching this video, what really struck me was how deeply India is rooted in colonization. So I came across this article called The Story of India from PBS, and I found some dates on there. So I'm just going to read off my laptop. This isn't a direct quote, but it's the notes that I was taking. So starting with the Mughal Empire, who ruled parts of India from 1526 to around 1757. The collapse of the Mughal Empire in the 18th century left a gap that the British East India Company and the French East India Company were eager to fill. By the late 18th century, the British had completely taken over. In 1858, power was transferred to the British Crown, initiating the era of the British Raj, which would not end until 1947. So, to quote Neha Mishra, this shaped the common man's association of white-colored skin with the ruling class, with power, with desirability, and also with beauty. Unknowingly, it has become a practice of attaching greater societal superiority and power to the fairer-skinned males and females, which in turn dictates and shapes the desire for a westernized concept of beauty with lighter skin. So in my research, I've come across a lot of criticism that, you know, the general population of India still has these very archaic ideologies when it comes to colorism. And let me just point out that India has only been an independent nation for 78 years. And before independence, there were centuries of colonization from lighter-skinned folks, the Mughal Empire and the British Empire, the British Raj. So you have these generations of Indians who have lived their entire lives in a colonized India. And so it's very difficult to undo 400 years of ideology in the 78 years that India has been an independent nation. So I think we need to give ourselves a little bit more time. And I think there has been progress that has been made, but I found this very interesting because at this point it's integrated into the Indian psyche because it is so deep-seated, right? The history of colonization in India is very deep-seated. So it's going to be difficult to undo all those things. So just wanted to point that out. Moving on. So another way that the British Raj kind of stayed in power in India was to give lighter skinned Indians privileges and to exclude darker skinned Indians. So you have probably heard of, if you're Indian, or your parents have told you about the sign that said, Indians and dogs not allowed, basically putting a human and a dog on the same level. And that's kind of an infamous sign of the British Raj in India. But light-skinned Indians were given positions of power. They were given positions in government. They were given greater access to education. And remember who labeled themselves as intellectuals? The Brahmins. So this is how the caste system and colonization are both linked to the reinforcement of colorist ideologies in India. So something else I didn't know is that, there were African slaves in India as well, and a lot of them served as domestic workers and servants to the elite. And this is another way that colorism and internalized racism can be reinforced in the country itself. If you are Indian, you might consider yourself superior to an African person who is enslaved. And that just, again, reinforces this idea of we're all people of color here. We all have more in common than we think, but there is an artificial divide that is being created that leads to separation, within subgroups of people. So those that are in power can create artificial conflict among the subgroups of the people that they are controlling. And we don't only see this with colorism and casteism, we also see this with religion. And I'm not going to get into it too much because that is a huge topic. I could make a whole other video about that. But, India was one big country. And when India became an independent nation, it separated into 3 countries, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And a huge part of this was because of the religious war that was created by the British Raj, separating Hindus and Muslims. And because of that, even when India became an independent nation, the partition was a bloodbath, and the partition led to the displacement of many Hindus and Muslims from their homes as they separated. The Hindus are in India and the Muslims are in Pakistan. That's just such a profound example of something that was predicated by the British Raj. When India became an independent country, these religious wars still exist, and colorism still exists as well. And it's all the aftermath of centuries of colonization. So I'm going to quote Dustin Jung again, because I feel like this quote really summarizes the first 2 sections of this video. He says, as Indians were viewed by foreign rulers in contrast to oneself, the hegemony of whiteness was gradually embedded. Perceptions of color existed before European colonization and are an integral part of caste classifications, even if castes are heavily influenced by elements of European racial ideology. Today, it is a complex undertaking to differentiate between those concepts as they are greatly intertwined. So I couldn't have said it better myself. These are all inextricably linked with one another. Casteism, colorism, and colonization. And it's very difficult to separate them because these ideologies of whiteness as the norm was being spread far and wide even before the colonization became prevalent in India. Whew. That was a lot. That was heavy. That was quite broad, I know. But now we're going to get into more contemporary effects of colorism. So let's talk about religion. If you are Hindu, or if you've seen depictions of Hindu gods and goddesses, you've probably noticed something. You may have noticed that a majority of them are very light-skinned with European features, and some of them even have a very light blue skin. But did you know that in the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, 2 of the greatest epics in Hindu mythology, many of the gods and avatars depicted are described as dark-skinned? So for this section of the video, I read yet another article. This one is by Vaishnavi Sri Barapu, and it's called Dark Goddesses and Me, Religious Colorism in Hindu India. So to read from that article, the revered goddess Parvati statues are traditionally cut out of black stone to represent her darker skin. Goddess Radha is often discussed as having golden skin. Even maidens known for their beauty, such as Draupadi, a strong protagonist in the Mahabharata, are described as being ethereally beautiful and still dark-skinned. Now, Both Ram and Krishna have been described as dark-skinned. In fact, the word Krishna means black in Sanskrit. So why are Ram and Krishna and Shiva depicted as a very light blue? Well, some people say it's because their skin was so dark that it had a bluish hue. But other people, like Sadhguru, yes, I'm quoting Sadhguru, Sadhguru has a different interpretation. So to read from his website, blue is the color of all-inclusiveness. You will see in the existence anything that is vast and beyond your perception generally tends to be blue, whether it is the ocean or the sky. It is based on this that so many gods in India are shown as blue skin. Shiva has blue skin, Krishna has blue skin, Ram has blue skin. It's not that their skin was blue. They were referred to as blue gods because they had a blue aura. So you have these descriptions of very dark-skinned gods and goddesses, but the way that they are portrayed is with very light skin. So to quote Rebecca Peters, instead of serving as a counter to colorism, these gods and their depictions refy colorism by maintaining typically white facial features and very light blue skin, while continuing to be called dark and black in the literature. So why is there a contradiction? Colonization, babes. I literally wrote colonization, babes, in my script. So yes, there is an obsession with fairness in India, having light skin, which we're going to talk about in the next couple sections. So to quote Rebecca Peters again, the association of skin color with caste, class, and morality that is refined in Hindu religious and cultural symbols and rhetoric allows colorism not only to be prevalent, but also to be practiced unabashedly among most of the population. So this point is drawn home in Neha Mishra's article, where she actually interviews several people. So she talks about the Indian National Museum in New Delhi, in which the gods and goddesses in the museum are more often than not portrayed as dark-skinned. But in the gift shop, all the statues of gods and goddesses except one were white. And so she asked them why this is the case. So I'm going to read quotes from two different employees. One employee said, "No one will want to purchase black colored sculptures, therefore all were fair colored." And the other one said, "Everybody wants to see fair, bright faces, and there is nothing wrong in that." Obviously, there is something wrong in that, right? Because we are starting to get a glimpse into this obsession with fairness and with light skin. So now let's really get into the contemporary ramifications of colorism in India that are very prevalent today. So the term complexion is frequently used as a euphemism in India to describe skin tone, kind of in the way that when an Indian auntie calls you healthy, she's actually calling you fat. So I say this to say that colorism is very much embedded in Indian culture to this day. Even in the semantics, words like gori, which means light-skinned, but is often used interchangeably to describe someone who's beautiful. And we'll definitely be talking more about that in part 2 when we talk about Bollywood. But beyond that, there is also a huge economy for skin lightening creams in India. So to quote Rebecca Peters, "Skin lightening is a multi-million-dollar industry in India. Brands such as Olay, Pond's, Lakme, and others produce fairness and skin lightening creams, face washes, serums, and facial bleaching products throughout India." So the market share for these products is approximately $450 million US, and this goes up by 15 to 20% every year. So even to this day, there's this huge desire to have lighter skin and to meet that ideology of whiteness that we've been talking about. We'll get more into it in part 2, but a lot of the commercials for Fair and Lovely and other products like it basically show a before and after of when you are darker skinned, you're undesirable, you aren't getting promoted, you aren't getting married, whatever your goal is, you're not meeting that goal. And then when you use these creams, you become more confident, you become more desirable, and you live happily ever after, right? So there's a transformation that is often depicted in these commercials. So Neha Mishra actually conducted a study with 100 college-aged Indians, both male and female, and she wanted to see, basically with everything else being equal, if skin color is related to higher social acceptance. And spoiler alert, it is. So I'm just going to read some statistics from her study. 42 out of 54 males and 29 out of 46 females mentioned light skin while describing pretty. 74% of males wanted to go out with a lighter female, and 61% of females wanted to go out with a lighter male, regardless of what area of India they were from. So Neha Mishra also interviews several women from different parts of India, and they give her anecdotes. So I'm going to read what these women are saying, and I really want you to take it in. I'm going to be sharing more anecdotes in the next section, but really take in, how this notion of colorism and whiteness being the norm has a deep and profound impact in people's lives. So the first person that I'm going to read quotes from is a woman named Ujwala, who is a lawyer. She says, "I have been asked blatantly, why don't you do something for your tan? I have to repeat it so many times. This is not a tan, this is my color. A lot of concerned aunties have even told me, why don't you drink milk with saffron in it? That will make you fairer. Even my own mother has prejudice towards fair skin. She has often told me, look at that girl. She is so fair and pretty. I can hear the resigned tone where she meant that she doesn't have a fair daughter. I use bleaching products, knowing the harms, yes. And I tell myself it's just to remove my tan, but I know maybe I don't want to get any darker. So yes, I do think about the color of my skin. When I go to weddings, if a girl is fairer than the guy, I immediately say, lucky guy. If a dark-skinned person sits next to me while I'm using public transport, subconsciously I relate darkness with unhygiene, and I have this prejudice that a person who is dark is not clean." So that is internalized colorism, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about that towards the end. So the next person I'm reading an anecdote from is from an architect. They didn't say her name. She says, during my cousin's puberty years, her mother would take her to hundreds of doctors for acne and to make her fair. It affected her psyche while growing up. She was told to apply turmeric and sandalwood on her face to make her grow lighter. Fairness creams were such a rage, and all the market products available were used on her. I saw her go through it. All of this was painful for her, and she went through hell. It's crazy and unfair. Fair and Lovely was the cream of the house. Everyone would apply it. My brother, my father, my mom. You wash your face, you apply Fair and Lovely, you put powder, then you go out. I have always done that. The next anecdote is from what Neha Mishra describes as a wheatish complexioned working mother of a brown-colored daughter. I find that language very interesting, but here's a quote from her. I come from the South. My daughter, who is 13 years old and dark-skinned, was told again and again when we were in Delhi, why don't you do something to your skin? Maybe it's a Delhi thing, but I have a couple friends wherein the guy's skin is almost black and his partner looks almost white. It does come to my mind, what did she see in him? So why should I blame someone else when these thoughts come to me and I am educated? So again, this is the internalized colorism, that these thoughts cross your mind subconsciously and very suddenly, and you kind of catch yourself like, oh, why did I think like that? And that's, again, something that we need to work to unlearn. The last anecdote is from Rajashri, who is a young mother. After her son was born, her fair-skinned in-laws used to often see his earlobes to check the actual skin color of the child, as they wanted the offspring to retain the similar color of the father's side. And she says, I didn't want a dark-colored baby like my sister-in-law, who was constantly told that her baby's color went on her side of the family and not their son's color. So I wanted a fair-colored child. Now, these make me sad, and this kind of leads us to the next and final section of this video, which is patriarchy, baby, because all these anecdotes that I have read are from women. There is one at the end about a boy, and they're checking his skin tone. Let's talk about patriarchy and colorism. So to quote my girl, Rebecca Peters, colorism affects women more than men. This means that women are held to higher beauty standards than men, that their usefulness as a mate and mother takes priority over career or other personal ambitions, and they have less say in their life choices compared to their male counterparts. Whew, I don't want to get on my soapbox here, but as a woman, something that really frustrates me is this idea that your value as a woman is linked to how desirable you are to men. And your ultimate symbol of worth as a woman is having a husband and having a man want to marry you. That's the ultimate status symbol. And we are taught that as very, very young women. Again, I don't want to get on a soapbox here, but I really am tired of the notion that women are only valued for their ability to find a man and to get married, because we are so much more than that. And this whole section is clearly very infuriating for me. When you define the value of a woman by her marriageability, it doesn't even matter who the man is. You know what I mean? Like, just because a man chooses to marry you, that's it. People don't care about who is the man and does he treat the woman well, and does the man let the woman have her own ambition? Like, there's nothing about like what kind of husband you have. You just need to have a husband, you know? And anyway, that's my little soapbox, but I'm just really sick of that. So please know that your worth is not determined by whether a man wants to marry you or not, okay? So I'm going to read another quote from another article that I found that I'll be quoting more in part 2. So this article is from the University of Texas at Austin, and it's titled Inclusive Hindi Instructional Materials Colorism. So, to read a quote from that article, more often than not, women with a darker skin tone are stigmatized since birth as being ugly, inauspicious, and undesirable, with limited prospects of being successful, where success is equated to making a suitable marriage alliance. Hooray! And to quote Rebecca Peters again, while the 2011 Indian census showed 940 women to every 1,000 men in the country, women are still held to a higher standard when it comes to marriageability. What this means is that women must prove themselves worthy of men before marrying them. And in like so many other cultures, appearance is a high priority for a good bride. So several articles that I read in my research were talking about bio data. So essentially, a lot of marriages in India are arranged, but not in the way that you might think. Basically, you know, now in the digital age, like there are a lot of websites and apps and such where, you know, parents can go look at your like profile and see prospective men or women and match someone with their son or their daughter. And so people submit like a bio data. So a bio data basically has like a photo of you, your name, your age, your height, your weight, your build, you know, and your complexion, obviously. So several of the articles that I read for this video had, you know, researched ads in the newspaper, for example, because you can also put that information in the newspaper to kind of find a match. And a lot of these, if not all of them, have complexion as a category and have like a fair complexion as something that they are seeking in a partner for their son or their daughter. And this is seen regardless of religion or caste. In the same survey that I mentioned earlier, conducted by Neha Mishra, over 55% of women admitted to regularly applying skin lightening creams to help with their goals of education, promotion, and finding a suitable match, despite knowing the risks of blood poisoning and cancer, among other health factors. And only 9% of men apply skin lightening cream. So that itself really shows how much this skews toward women. We're going to end this section with a couple more anecdotes from Neha Mishra's article. Some of them are from the same people I mentioned earlier and some are new. So let's start with Ujwala again, who is a lawyer. She says, I can see subtle differences in the treatment towards me and fair-skinned girls, between family, between cousins, as well as the outside world. Better service is given to fair-skinned females. Even inside a courtroom, I had to try harder to get the same orders which a fair-skinned female will get much more easily. And the second anecdote is from the architect, who describes herself as having a chocolate skin tone, and this is what she said. She had heard older people saying to her, oh my God, she is so dark. How is she going to grow up and never get married? She realized that she was a smarter kid, but first impressions didn't go well with most people I had to meet. Because visually, when people meet me, skin color mattered. I felt irritated. And how sad is that? That People look at you and the first thing they see is your skin color, something that you cannot control. This is a woman in her 30s. This is another anecdote. When I was a child, I used to listen to my parents talking about color. My sister was much darker than me, and that was a big concern for everyone in the family. They were worried about her marriage. In fact, she was forced to get married to my brother-in-law. And I remember my parents telling my sister, "Be happy that someone really liked you in spite of your color. What if you lose this match? You may not find another suitable match." Okay. I hate that. I hate that. I hate that. I hate that. It really goes back to what I was talking about earlier of like, you know, you should just be lucky that a man chose you, and it doesn't matter who the man is. It doesn't matter if you like the man. Just the fact that a man chose you, and the fact that her parents told her that he chose you in spite of your color is crazy to me. It's just crazy. But these are real conversations. This was just a handful of people that Neha Mishra interviewed, but so many women experience this, not just in India, all around the world. It's infuriating to me. We'll talk about that in Bollywood as well, because there are women in Bollywood who have bleached their skin and they're a couple shades lighter than they were naturally. So anyway, guys, so that was a lot. I have been recording for over an hour. So we'll see how long this video turns out. But I wanted to just end with some final thoughts here. So like I mentioned earlier, you know, an ideology that has been instilled in all of us for centuries is very hard to unlearn in a matter of decades. It's probably going to take a couple of generations. But what we can do right now is really look at ourselves and our internalized colorism, because I'm sure it does exist, obviously not just with Indians, but all around the world. Check yourself. When you make some sort of claim or generalization, stop yourself in your tracks and be like, oh, did I really just say that? And, you know, take the time to unlearn. And please, for the love of God, please don't make comments to people on things that they cannot control. Like, you know, that saying of like, if someone can't change the thing that you're talking about in 5 seconds, just don't tell them about it. I think that's a very important lesson to learn, because this has a huge psychological impact on so many people, and we don't want to contribute to that. So those are my final thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this video was informative. I hope you took something away from this. I had a lot of fun, if fun is the right word, but I did enjoy, you know, researching this, and I dove very deep into it, as you can probably tell. And I will see you guys in part 2 when we talk about Bollywood, and hopefully that one will be a little more lighthearted. All right. Bye, guys.